Hello guys, welcome to the channel. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how to cut and sew this beautiful top right here. I got this style inspiration from Kiki on Instagram, and today I would love to show you how to cut and sew it. For this top I use less than 2 yards of Ankara fabric. However, you may use 2 yards or more depending on your size. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, this will be a perfect opportunity for you to hit that subscribe button, and please like this video so that other people would be able to learn from it as well. With that being said, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is to place my paper on fold. I'll be cutting for the front pattern first, and I'm placing it on fold because the neckline is asymmetric. That means the left side is different from the right side. So after placing your paper on fold, you're going to be marking your chest line, your bust line, your under bust line, your waistline, and your hip line. Also on the top line, you're going to mark half of your shoulder measurements, and then you mark it on the chest line and connect. And then you go down by 1 inch from this new line, and then on the top line you mark 3 inch for your neck width and you connect it. And then here you divide this new line by 2, and then you go in by 0.5 inch. While on the chest line you're going to mark quarter of your bust measurements plus 1.5 inch sewing allowance, and then you're going to use a French curve to connect as I'm showing you now. And then from here I'm going to be marking half of my nipple to nipple measurements on the bust line, waistline, and hip line. After marking it, I'm going to be going down by 1 inch, while on the waistline I'll mark 0.5 inch on both sides for the darts, while on the under bust line I'm going to be marking 0.5 inch plus 0.25 inch, that is 0.75 inch on both sides. So I'll use a French curve and I'll connect these points. Then from this point, from the waistline, I'm going to go down by 5.5 inch, and then I'll use a rule to connect it during the darts. Then from here on the waistline, I'm going to mark quarter of my waist measurement plus the darts plus 1.5 inch sewing allowance. While on the hip line, I'm going to be marking quarter of my hip measurements plus 1.5 inch sewing allowance. From this point, I'm going to use my rule to connect these 3 points. Then from this point also, I'm going to be marking the length of the top. I don't want this top to go all the way to my hip line, so I'm going to be marking it where I want the top to stop. And then from that point, I'm going to go in by 1 inch like so, and then I'll use a French curve to connect it as shown. So after connecting it, all you have to do now is to cut it. Also remember to add half an inch sewing allowance on the shoulder line, and then you go down by 3 inch for the neck width. Then by the time you're done cutting, you're going to divide this line by 2, and then you connect it all the way to the bust line. Then from here, when you open it up, this is what it should look like. At this point, I've replicated everything that I did on the right side. I've done it on the left side. So now I'm just going to be marking the middle of this pattern. And then from this point, I'm going to be going in on the shoulder line by 1 inch. And then I'll use my French curve to connect it during the neckline. However, if you want a straight neckline like so, you can use a rule and connect it. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to be using the French curve to connect it. While on the other side, I'm going to be connecting it all the way to the armhole. I'm going to be bringing it to as high or as low as I want to. It just depends on what you prefer. And then you connect it. So after connecting it, I'm going to measure what I have on the under bust dart, which is 1.5. So I'm going to be dividing this 1.5 on this new line that we marked. So I'm marking 1 inch on the point facing the armhole, and then I'm marking 0.5 inch on the point facing the center front. I'm also adding 0.25 on both sides, and I'm connecting using a French curve. And then at this point also, I'm going to be redrawing the armhole, connecting it to that point. And then from this point now, we're going to measure this line. This is what we are going to be using as a guide to know how long our spaghetti strap is going to be. So now mine is 4 inches. That means my spaghetti strap should be 4 times 2, that is 8 inches long. So from this point, you're going to just cut it out. Another thing to do is to measure the dart on the point facing the armhole, and then measure the dart on the point facing the center front. If you notice, the dart facing the armhole is longer than the dart facing the center front. So what we have to do now is to reduce the one that is facing towards the armhole. So that one is, the one facing the center front is 5, while the one facing the armhole is 6. So I'm going in by 1 inch, and then I'm using a French curve to connect it back to the armhole, and then I'll cut off the excess. After that, I'm going to just cut the remaining part of the pattern. Just pay attention to the lines I'm following while I'm cutting it. So when you're done cutting, this is what you should have. So you're going to be placing this on the fabric, and you're going to be cutting 1 piece for each. Then for the back pattern, I've gone ahead to draw out my chest line, my waistline, and my hip line. And then also I've marked half of my shoulder measurements, and I've connected it to the chest line. I've gone down by 1 inch, and then I've marked my neck width and my neck depth, and I connect it. And then on the chest line, I'm going to mark quarter of my bust measurements plus 1.5 inch allowance. And then I'll connect it to the middle of the line there. I'm also going to be adding 0.5 inch sewing allowance for the shoulder line. For the back, I'm not using any dart, so I'm just marking quarter of my waist measurements plus 1.5 inch allowance without that. While for the hip line, marking quarter of my hip measurement plus 1.5 inch sewing allowance without the dart. Then now I'll just use a rule to connect all 3 points. And then also I'm going to mark the length of the top also on the back pattern. I'm using 20 inches. So I'll go in by 1 inch, and I'll use a French curve to connect it like so. And then when you are done with that, all you have to do now is to cut it off. So after cutting, this is a fabric that I use for this top. I have 2 yards of it. So you're going to place the pattern on it, and you're going to be cutting. Like I said, you are cutting 1 piece for each pattern. So also remember to cut the lining as well. And I've gone ahead to add interfacing to the fabric. Also pay attention to the darts that I added. I added half an inch sewing allowance on the dart line. So I'm going to be joining the center front to the side front using the half an inch sewing allowance that we added. So right now it may appear as if one is longer than the other, but this is just because you are trying to join 2 curve points together. So just take your time and pin it down and take it to your sewing machine and you sew it. When you're done sewing, it should look like this. Then for the other side, you're also going to do the same thing. I added half an inch sewing allowance for the dart, so I'm just going to be connecting it back together using the half an inch sewing allowance. And when you are done connecting, this is what it should look like. So after connecting, you can also go ahead to notch the dart points, and then you can top stitch it if you are not a beginner. And then from this point, I've also gone ahead to cut for the back pattern, and all I'm doing now is to place the back pattern together like so. I'm trying to close the zipper allowance that we added, so I'm joining it together. And then from here, I'm going to use the front pattern to know exactly where mono strap is going to be. So from here, I'm going to mark that point. So at this point now, I'm going to place the front pattern on the back pattern like so, and I'm going to be tracing out the shoulder line on the back. Then after tracing it out, another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the remaining part of the pattern we cut off on the front pattern, and then I'm going to be measuring it from the shoulder line down, and then while on the back I'm going to measure exactly what we have on the front. I will measure it on the back, and then after measuring it, I'm going to connect it using a French curve. Then after measuring, I'm also going to use the front pattern, at the side fronts. That is the part where there is a mono strap. I'm going to be tracing the armhole on the back pattern like so. So after tracing it out, I'm going to cut it off. So by the time you open it up, this is what it should look like. So now I'm just placing the lining on the fabric like so, making sure that everywhere is aligned, and then I'll cut exactly what I have on the fabric. I'm going to cut it on the lining. Then after cutting, I'm going to separate this from each other. I'm going to separate this from each other, and then now I'm going to be joining the back to the front at the shoulder line. So normally I'm supposed to use 1/2 inch sewing allowance to join the back to the front, but because of the nature of this neckline, I'm going to be using 1 inch just to ensure that that shoulder point is firm. Also, I've gone ahead to cut the strap for this top, and I'm just going to be closing it like so. So when you're done, this is what you should have. You're just going to take it to the pressing iron, you press it very well, and then from here you measure the length of this strap. You're going to make sure that it's nothing less than 9 inches. 8 inches for the original length of the strap, and then 1/2 inch on both sides for the sewing allowance. So you're going to attach it on the fabric like so. Then if you did the correct thing, by the time you place it like so, it should be like this. So the next thing to do now is to measure the length of the neckline from the center front all the way to the center back. When you measure it, whatever you get, you're going to divide it by 6 because we're about to cut a full circle. So now I'm going ahead to cut a fabric that is 12 by 12 inches. So I'm going to fold it like so, and then I'm going to be marking the 2 inches that we got after dividing 13 by 6. I'm going to be marking it on the fabric like so. And then the length of this full circle is that I want the length of this full circle to be 3 inches plus 1 inch sewing allowance. That is 4. So 4 inches plus 2 is 6. So the total length that I'm marking now is about 6 inches. So when you're done marking it, you're going to cut it off like so. So after cutting it, you're going to open it up, and you're going to open one side. And then from here, you're also going to place this on the lining, and you cut exactly what we have here on the lining. When you're done cutting on the lining, you're going to place the lining on the fabric like so, and you're going to sew around it using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. And then you turn it to the right side and top stitch it. After top stitching, what we have to do is to turn it back to the wrong side, and you're going to close that edge. I've also gone ahead to join the fabric of the full circle to the lining at the width point. So now what I'm doing is I'm aligning the full circle to the neckline of this top. So I'm starting from the center front all the way to the center back. So when you're done aligning, you're going to close it you are going to join it together using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. Also take note that I did not add it all the way to the zipper line. I started after the zipper line. So when you're done with that, you're going to be placing the lining that we have also joined, just like we did for the fabric. I'm going to be attaching the lining to the fabric, and I'm going to be closing it at the neckline using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So when you're done sewing, you're going to notch it, and then you turn it to the right side and you top stitch it. When you're top stitching, you are making sure the full circle is facing the fabric while the lining is facing the allowance. So when you're done top stitching, the next thing to do is to close the down part of this top. So we are going to be joining it to the lining, making sure that the main fabric is about 0.25 inch shorter than the lining. The reason why we are doing this is because we don't want the lining to be coming out after we are done sewing. So when you're done joining it together like so, you're going to sew using 1/2 inch sewing allowance. For the back, you're also going to do the same thing, making sure that the main fabric is 0.25 inch shorter than the lining. And then you sew using 1/2 inch, you turn it to the right side and top stitch it. You're also going to be joining the other side of the back pattern with the lining, and you're also going to close it at the zipper line. So the next thing now to do is to close the armhole of this top. So we are going to face it to the wrong side like so, and you're going to be pinning it down, making sure that the shoulder line of the back of the fabric is aligned to that of the lining. And then you're going to sew round it using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. When you're done sewing, you're going to notch it, and then you turn it to the right side like so. So after turning it to the right side, you're going to be adding the zip to this top at the back. So when you're done adding the zip, the next thing we are going to do now is to join the remaining step of the full circle. Remember, this top has 3 steps of full circle attached. So now we're going to be measuring 0.5 inch away from the neckline, or from the center front all the way to the back. So whatever we get, we're going to divide it by 6 inches because we're about to cut a full circle. So right now what we have here is 18 by 18 inches fabric. So I'm going to fold it like so, and then I'll fold it further also like this. Then after folding, I'm going to be marking what we got after dividing 15 inches by 6. So I'm marking 2.5 inch. And then for the length of the full circle, for the second full circle, I want it to be about 5.5 inches long. So I'm going to add 5.5 inches plus 2.5 inches. That is about 8 inches plus 1 inch sewing allowance. That is 9 inches. So I'm marking 9 inches down. While for the third step, I'm going to be using a 22 by 22 inch fabric. And then the width is the same with the second, which is 2.5 inches. Whereas for the length of the full circle is going to be 8.5 inches. So 8.5 inches plus 2.5, that is about 11 inches. Then plus 1 inch sewing allowance, that is 12. So we're going to be marking 12 inches at the down part. So everything that we have cut out, we are going to cut on the lining as well. And then you join it at the down part and at the side, just like we did for the shorter full circle. We are going to be joining it. And then now we are going to join the second step to the third step at the width of the full circle. By the time you're done joining, you're going to be attaching it to the top at 0.5 inch away from the neckline. So you're going to be sewing on it, and this is what you should have. Then take note that I also folded the edge of the full circle inward while I was sewing. So when you're done sewing, all you have to do now is to join the back to the front at the side seam. You're going to make sure that the strap is well placed, everything is arranged before you close it. And that'll be all for this dress. If you did enjoy this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.